Hello, my name is Joshua Mugabe. I welcome you to nervous system. What are the physiological systems known as integrative systems? Why is this designation justified? Integrative systems are the nervous systems and endocrine systems. Designation is justified since both systems control and regulate biological functions and act at distance, receiving information from the organs and tissues and sending effector commands, nervous impulses, and hormones to organs and tissues, thus integrating the body. What are the structures that are part of the nervous system? The structures that form the nervous system can be divided into the central nervous system, CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, PNS. The organs of the central nervous system are the brain, that is the cerebrum, brainstem, and cerebellum, and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is made up of nerves and neuroganglia. Beside this organ, the meninges, dura mater, arachnoid, and pia mater are part of the nervous system too, since they cover and protect the encephalon and the spinal cord. Which are the main cells of the nervous system? The main cell of the nervous system are the neurons. Beside the neurons, the nervous system is also constituted of glia cells. What are the function differences between neurons and glia cells? Glia cells and neurons are the cells that form the nervous system. Neurons are cells that function receiving, transmitting the neural impulses, and glia cells, astrocytes, microgliocytes, epidermal cells, and oligodendrocytes are the cells that support, feed, and insulate, that is electrically, the neurons. The Schwann cells that produce myelin sheath of the peripheral nervous system can also be considered as glia cells. What are the three main parts into which the neurons are divided? What are their respective functions? The three main parts in which the neurons are didactically divided are dendrites, cell body, and axon. Dendrites are projection of the plasma membrane that receive neuroimpulses from other neurons. The cell body is where the nucleus and the main cellular organelles are located. The axon is the long membrane projection that transmits the neuron impulse at distance to other neurons, to muscle cells, and to other effector cells. What is the name of the terminal portion of the axon? The terminal portion of the axon is called presynaptic membrane. Through this membrane, neurotransmitters are released into the synaptic junction. What are synapses? Synapses are structures that transmit the neuroimpulse between two neurons. When electrical impulse arrives, the presynaptic membrane of the axon releases a neurotransmitter that binds to the postsynaptic receptors of the dendrite of the next cell. The activated state of this receptor alters the permeability of the dendritic membrane, and electric depolarization propagates along the neuron plasma membrane of its axon. What is an example of situation in which the neuron cell body is located in part of the body and its axonoterminal portion is another distant part of the body? Why does this happen? Most of the neurons are situated within the brain and the spinal cord, what we call the central nervous system, in places known as the neuronuclei. Neuroganglion and simply ganglia are structure of the peripheral nervous system located beside the spinal column or near some organs where neuron cell bodies are located. Neurons situated at specific points can present distant axonal termination, and they can also receive impulse from axon of distant neurons. The inferior motor neurons situated in the spinal cord are examples, since their axons can transmit information to the extremities of the inferior limbs, triggering the contraction of the foot. According to the function of the transmitted neuroimpulse, which are the types of neurons? How different are the concepts of afference and efference of the neuroimpulse transmission? There are two types of neurons: afferent neurons and efferent neurons, and interneurons. Afferent neurons are those that only transmit sensory information from the tissue to the neuronuclei and ganglia, where they make connection to the interneurons or effector neurons. The efferent neurons are those that transmit commands to tasks performed in several parts of the body. Interneurons, also known as association neuron or relay neuron, serve as a connection between the other two neurons. Afference is the conduction of sensory impulses. Efference is the conduction of effector impulses, impulses that command some body action. What are nerves? Axons extend throughout the body inside nerves. Nerves are axon-containing structures presenting many axons and covered by connective tissues. The nerve connects the neuron nuclei and ganglion with the tissues. Nerves may contain sensory axons, sensory nerves only, motor axon, motor neurons, or both types of axon, mixed nerves. What are ganglia? Ganglia, in singular ganglion or neuroganglia, are structures located outside the central nervous system. For example, beside the spinal column or the viscera, made of concentration of neuron bodies. Examples of neuroganglion are the ganglia that concentrate cells, bodies of sensory neurons in the dorsal root of the spinal cord. The ganglion of the mytelic plexus, responsible for peristaltic movement of the digestive tube. In the central nervous system, the concentration of the neuron bodies are called nuclei and not ganglia. What is meant by peripheral nervous system, PNS? The peripheral nervous system comprehends the nerves and ganglia of the body. What is the function of the myelin sheath? Do all axons present myelin sheath? The function of the myelin sheath is to improve the safety and the speed of the neural impulse transmission along the axon. Myelin sheaths serve as an electrical insulator, preventing dispersion of the impulse to other adjacent structures. Since the myelin sheath has a gap called ravia of nodes, its length, the neural impulse jumps from one node to another, thus increasing the speed of the neurotransmission. Not all neurons have a myelin sheath. There are myelinated axonal fibers and unmyelinated ones. What are the cells that produce myelin sheath? Of which substance is the myelin sheath formed? In the central nervous system, myelin sheath is made by opposition of oligodendrocyte membranes. Each oligodendrocyte can cover a portion of the axon in several different neurons. In the peripheral nervous system, the myelin sheath is made by consecutively swan cell membranes covering segments of a single axon. Radians of node appear in the intercellular spaces between these cells. The myelin sheath is rich in lipids, but it also contains proteins. What are some diseases characterized by progressive loss of the axon myelin sheath? Multiple sclerosis is a severe disease caused by progressive destruction of the myelin sheath of the central nervous system. The Guillain-Barré disease is due to the destruction of the myelin sheath of the peripheral nervous system caused by autoimmunity, attack by own immune system. Genetic deficiency in the formation and preservation of the myelin sheath is an X-linked inheritance called adrenoleukodystrophy. The movie Lorenzo Oils featured a boy with this disease, and his father is dramatically searched for the treatment. What are meninges and cerebrospinal fluid? Meninges, these are membranes that enclose and protect the central nervous system. Cerebrospinal fluid is the fluid that separates the three layers that form the meninges, and it has the function of nutritive support, defense, and mechanical protection of the central nervous system. What is the difference between the brain and the cerebrum? What are the main parts of these structures? The concept of the brain or encephalon comprehends the cerebrum, mostly referred as the hemispheres, but actually the concept also includes the thalamus and the hypothalamus. The brain stem, that is the midbrain, the pons and the medulla, and the cerebellum, the brain and the spinal cord form the central nervous system. The cerebrospinal fluid fills and protects activities of the brain and the spinal cord. What are the cerebrum anatomically divided? The cerebrum is divided into two cerebral hemispheres, the right and the left. Each hemisphere is made up of four cerebral lobes: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. Each cerebral lobe contains the gray matter and white matter. Gray matter is the outer portion, and it is made up of neuron bodies. Gray matter is also known as the cerebral cortex. The white matter is the inner portion, and it is white because it is a region where the axons and cortical neurons pass. What is the brain origin responsible for coordination and equilibrium of the body? The central nervous system The cerebellum is the main controller of the motor coordination and equilibrium of the body. Do not confuse this with muscle command performed by the cerebral hemisphere. What is the cerebellum more developed in mammals that jump and fly? Cerebellum is the main brain structure that coordinates the movement and equilibrium of the body. For this reason, it appears more developed in animals that jump and fly, like birds. Cerebellum is also very important in the flight of birds. Which is the brain region responsible for regulation of breathing and blood pressure? The neuroregulation of breathing, blood pressure, and other physiological parameters like heartbeat, digestive secretion, peristaltic movement, transpiration is performed by the medulla. The medulla, together with the pons and midbrain, is part of the brain stem. Which of the brain region that receives conscious sensation information, which is the brain region that triggers the voluntary motor activities? The brain conscious sensory information is received by neurons situated in the spatial region called postcentral gyrus or sensory gyrus. Gyri are called volution of the cerebrum. Each of the two postcentral gyri are located in one of the parietal lobes of the cerebrum. Voluntary motor activity, voluntary muscle movement, is commanded by neurons situated in the precentral gyrus or the motor gyrus. Each of the two precentral gyrus are located in the frontal lobes of the cerebrum. The name post and precentral refer to the fact that motor and sensory gyri are spaced apart in each cerebral hemisphere by subclass centralis, a fissure that separates the parietal and the frontal lobe. What is the spinal cord? Of which elements is the spinal cord constituted? The spinal cord is the dorsoneural cord of vertebrates. It's part of the central nervous system that continues in the trunk and facilitates neurointegration of the whole body. The spinal cord is made up of a group of neurons situated in its central portion, forming the gray matter, and axon fibers in the exterior portion, forming the white matter. Neurobundles connect both lateral sides of the spinal cord segments to form the dorsal and ventral spinal roots that join to form the spinal nerves. The dorsospinal root presents the ganglion with neurons that receive sensory information. The ventral spinal root contains the motor fibers. Therefore, dorsal root are sensory roots, and ventral root are motor roots. Which are the brain regions associated with memory? Main region of the nervous system associated with memory phenomena are the hippocampus, situated in the interior portion of the temporal lobe and frontal lobe cortex, both part of the cerebral hemisphere. How is it structurally explained that the motor activity of the left side of the body is controlled by the right cerebral hemisphere, and the motor activity of the right side of the body is controlled by the left hemisphere of the cerebral hemisphere? In the cerebral hemisphere, there are neurons that centrally command and control muscle movement. They are neurons called superior motor neurons, and they are located in special gyrus of both frontal lobes, known as the motor gyrus or precentral gyrus. The superior motor neurons send axon and transmit impulses to the inferior motor neurons of the spinal cord for the neck, trunk, and limb movement, and to the motor nuclei of the cranial nerves for the face, eyes, mouth movement. The fiber crawls to the other side of the specific area of those axon paths. About 2 to 3 of the fiber that go down the spinal cord cross the medulla level, forming a structure known as pyramidal discussion. The other 1/3 of the fiber descend in the same side of their original cerebral hemisphere, cross only with the spinal cord at the level where they associate the motor spinal root exit. The fiber that command the inferior motor neurons of the cranial nerve cross the other side just before the connection with the nuclei of these nerves. The motor fibers that descend from the superior motor neurons to the inferior motor neurons of the spinal cord form the pyramidal tract. Injury of this tract, for example, caused by the spinal section or by central or spinal tumors, may lead to paragria or tetragria. What is the movement of arc reflex? What is meant by the arc reflex? In some situations, the movement of skeletal striated muscle does not depend upon the command of the superior motor neurons, i.e., not triggered by voliation. Involuntary movement of this muscle may happen when sensory fiber that make direct or indirect connection with the inferior motor neurons are unexpectedly stimulated in situations that suggest danger to the body. This happens, for example, in the patellar reflex or knee jerk reflex, when a certain percussion on the knee patella, kneecap, triggers an involuntary contraction of the quadriceps, the extension muscle of the thigh. Another example of the arc reflex occurs when someone steps on a sharp object. One leg retracts and the other, by the arc reflex, distends to maintain the equilibrium of the body. Which are the types of neurons that participate in the spinal arc reflex? Where are these cell bodies situated? In the arc reflex, first the sensory neuron located in the ganglion and the dorsospinal root connects stimulus information from the tissue. The sensory neuron make direct or indirect through interneuron connection with the inferior motor neuron of the spinal cord. These motor neurons then command a reflex action. So sensory neuron, interneuron, and inferior motor neuron participate in the arc reflex. What are the respective constituents of the gray matter and the white matter of the spinal cord? Gray matter or gray substances of the spinal cord contain predominantly neuron bodies. That is the inferior motor neuron, secondary sensory neuron, and interneurons. The white matter is mainly made up of axons that connects neurons to the brain with the spinal neurons. In the neural impulse generated by the stimulus that triggers the arc reflex restricted within the neuron of this circuit, the sensory fiber that first conduct the arc reflex connect with neurons of the arc reflex, but it also connects with the secondary sensory neuron of the spinal cord that transmit the information upward to other neurons of the brain. This is obvious since the person that received the initial stimulus, for example, percussion of his or her kneecap, perceives it, meaning that the brain becomes conscious of the fact. How is it explained that a person with the spinal cord sectioned at the cervical level is still able to perform patellar reflex? The arc reflex depends only on the integrity of the fiber at the single spinal level. In the arc reflex, the motor response to the stimulus is automatic and involuntary and does not depend upon the passage of information to the brain. So it happens even if the spinal cord is damaged or the other levels. How does poliomyelitis affect the neurotransmission in the spinal cord? The poliovirus parasite destroys the spinal motor neuron, causing paralysis of the muscles that depends on these neurons. Concerning variation of the individual, how can reaction of the nervous system be classified? The efference reaction of the nervous system can be classified into voluntary when controlled by the will and involuntary, those not consciously controlled. Example of reaction triggered by variation are the movement of the limbs, tongue, and respiratory muscles. Examples of involuntary effervescence are those commands the peristaltic movement, the heartbeat, arterial wall muscles. The skeletal striated muscle are voluntarily contracted. Cardiac striation or striated or smooth muscles are involuntarily contracted. What are the function division of the nervous system? Functionally, the nervous system can be divided into somatic nervous system and visceral nervous system. Somatic nervous system include the central and peripheral structures that make voluntary control effervescence. Central and peripheral structure that participate in the control of vegetative and conscious function of the body are included in the concept of visceral nervous system. The efferent portion of the visceral nervous system is called autonomic nervous system. What are the two divisions of the autonomic nervous system? The autonomic nervous system is divided into the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system comprehends the nerves that come out from the ganglia of the neurochain laterally to the spinal cord, near the spinal cord, thus are distant from the tissue they innervate. The central and peripheral neurons associated with the neurons are also part of the sympathetic. The parasympathetic nervous system is made up of nerves and central or peripheral neuron related to the visceral ganglion, neuroganglion, situated near the tissue they innervate. What is antagonism between sympathetic and parasympathetic neuroaction? In general actions, the sympathetic and parasympathetic are antagonistic. That is to say, while one stimulates something, the other inhibits, and vice versa. The organs, with few exceptions, get effervescence from these two systems and antagonisms. For example, parasympathetic system stimulates salivation, while sympathetic inhibits it. Parasympathetic constricts the pupil, while sympathetic dilates. Parasympathetic contracts the bronchi, while sympathetic relaxes them. Sympathetic excites the genital organs, while parasympathetic inhibits the excitation. Using examples of invertebrate nervous system, how can the process of evolution cephalization be described? Considering the examples of invertebrate, it is observed that evolution makes increasing of the complexity of organism to be accompanied by convergence of neuron cells to special structures controlling and commanding the ganglion and the brain. In simple invertebrates like Cnidaria, the nervous cells are not concentrated, but they are found dispersed in the body. In Platyhelminths, a beginning of cephalization with the anterior ganglion concentrating the neurons is already verified. In annelids and arthropods, the existence of cerebral ganglion is evident. The cephalloid muscles and cephalization is even greater, and the brain commands the nervous system. What are some of the main differences of vertebrates' nervous system comparing to invertebrates? In vertebrates, the nervous system is well characterized, having the brain, dorsal neuron, cord, protected by rigged skeletal structures. In most invertebrates, the nervous system is predominantly ganglia and ventral neuron cords. What are the protective structure of the central nervous system present in vertebrates? In the vertebrate, the brain and the spinal cord are protected by the membranes, the meninges, and osseous structures, respectively the skull and the vertebral column. These protections are fundamental for the integrity of those important organs that command the functioning of the body. What is the nature of the stimulus received and transmitted by the neurons? The neurons receive and transmit chemical stimuli through the neurotransmitters released in the synapse. Along the neuron body, however, impulse transmission is electrical. So neurons conduct electrical and chemical stimuli. What are the two main ions that participate in the electrical impulse transmission in the neurons? The two main ions that participate in electrical impulse transmission in the neuron are sodium cations and potassium cations. Which is the normal sign of electrical charge between the two sides of the neuron plasma membrane? What is the potential difference of voltage generated between these two sides? What is the voltage called? As in most cells, regions just outside the surface of the neuroplasma membrane present a positive electrical charge in relation to the region just inside, thus is negative. The normal or at rest, the potential difference across the membrane is about negative 70 millivolts. This voltage is called the resting potential of the neuron. How do sodium and potassium ion maintain the resting potential of the neuron? The plasma membrane of the neuron, when at rest, maintains electrical potential difference between the external and internal surfaces. This voltage is called the resting potential. The resting potential is negative 70 millivoltage, indicates that the interior is more negative than the exterior, negative polarization. This condition is maintained by transport of sodium and potassium ions across the plasma membrane. The membrane is permeable to potassium ions, but not to sodium ions. At rest, positive potassium ion exit the cell in favor of the concentration gradient. Since within the cell, the potassium concentration is higher than the exterior space. The positive sodium ions cannot, however, go into the cell. As the positive potassium ion exit the cell, with not enough compensation positive ion entering the cell, the intracellular space becomes more negative and the cell stays polarized. How is depolarization of the neural plasma membrane generated? Does the cell return to the original rest? When the neuron receives stimulus by binding to the neurotransmitter substance, the specific receptor sodium channel opens, and permeability of the plasma membrane in the postsynaptic region is altered. Sodium ions then go into the cell, causing lowering the negativity and the membrane potential. If this reduction in the membrane potential reaches a level called excitation threshold, the threshold of potential about negative 50 millivoltage, the action potential is generated, i.e., depolarization intensifies until reaching the maximum level, and depolarization current is transmitted along the remaining length of the neural membrane. If the excitation threshold is reached, voltage-dependent sodium channels in the membrane open, allowing more sodium ions to enter into the cell in favor of the concentration gradient, and approximately negative 35 millivolt level, the positive polarization of the membrane is achieved. The voltage-dependent sodium channel then closes, and more voltage-dependent potassium channels open. Potassium ions then exit the cell in favor of the concentration gradient, and the potential difference in the membrane decreases, the process called repolarization. The action potential triggers the same electrical phenomenon in the neighboring region, the plasma membrane, and the impulse is transmitted through the dendrite to the terminal region of the axon. What is the excitation threshold of the neuron? How does the threshold relate to all or nothing rule of the neuron transmission? The excitation threshold of a neuron is the depolarization level that must be caused by a stimulus to be transmitted as a neural impulse. This value is about negative 50 millivoltage. The transmission of the neural impulse along the neural membrane obeys an all or nothing rule, or it happens with maximum intensity or nothing happens. Always and only when the excitation threshold is reached, the depolarization continues and the membrane reaches its maximum possible positive polarization, about positive 35 millivoltage. If the excitation threshold is not reached, nothing happens. How does depolarization of the neuromembrane start? The primary cause of neurodepolarization is the binding of the neurotransmitter released in the synapse by the axon of the neuron that sent the signal to specific receptors in the membrane of the neuron that is receiving the stimulus. The binding of the neurotransmitter on these receptors is a reversible phenomenon that alters the membrane's permeability of the region, since the binding causes sodium channel to open. When the positive sodium ions enters the cell in favor of their concentration gradient, the membrane voltage increases, thus lessening the negative polarization. If this depolarization reaches an excitation threshold about negative 50 millivoltage, depolarization continues and the action potential is reached, and the impulse is transmitted along the cell membrane. How different are the concept of action potential, resting potential, and excitation threshold? The action potential is the maximum positive voltage level achieved by the neuron in the process of neuroactivation, around positive 35 millivoltage. The action potential triggers depolarization of the nearby region and the plasma membrane, and thus propagation of the impulse along the neuron. The resting potential is the membrane voltage when the cell is not excited, about negative 70 millivoltage. The excitation threshold is the voltage level about negative 50 millivoltage that the initial depolarization must reach for the action potential to be attained. In chemical terms, how is the neural repolarization achieved? Repolarization is the return of the membrane potential from the action potential, that is 35 millivoltage, to the resting potential, negative 70 millivoltage. When the membrane reaches the action potential, voltage-gated sodium channel close. The voltage-gated potassium channels open. So sodium stops entering the cell and potassium starts exit. Therefore, repolarization is due to exiting of potassium cations from the cells. Repolarization causes the potential difference temporarily to increase under negative 70 millivoltage below the resting potential, the phenomenon known as hypolarization. What is the mechanism by which the neuroimpulses are transmitted along the axon? The neuroimpulses are transmitted along the neuromembrane through depolarization, a consecutive neighboring region. When the region of the internal surface of the membrane is depolarized, it becomes more positive in relation to the neighboring integral region. So positive electrical charges, ions, move towards this more negative region. The voltage-gated sodium channels are activated and open. The action potential then linearly propagates along the membrane until near the presynaptic region of the axon. What is the structure through which the neuroimpulse is transmitted from one cell to another? What is its parts? The structure through the neuroimpulse passes from one cell to another is the synapse. The synapse is composed of the presynaptic membrane in the terminal portion of the axon of the transmitter cell, the synaptic cleft or the synaptic space, and the postsynaptic membrane of the dendrite of the receptor cells. How does the synaptic transmission between the neurons take place? The propagation of the action potential along the axon reaches the region intermediately anterior to the presynaptic membrane, causing its permeability to calcium ions to change, and these ions enter the cell. The presynaptic area of the axon, there are many neurotransmitters, repeated vesicles, that by means exocytosis activated by calcium influx release the neurotransmitter into the synaptic cleft. The neurotransmitter then binds to the specific receptor of the postsynaptic membrane. The binding of the neurotransmitter on the receptor is reversible. That is, the neurotransmitter are not consumed after the process. Within the binding of the neurotransmitter to the postsynaptic receptors, the permeability of the postsynaptic membrane is altered, and depolarization that will lead to the first action potential of the postsynaptic cell begins. What are some important neurotransmitters? The following are some neurotransmitters: adrenaline, epinephrine, noradrenaline, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, dopamine, serotonin, histamine, GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, glycine, aspartate, nitric oxide. Since neurotransmitters are not consumed in the synaptic process, what are the mechanisms to reduce their concentration in the synaptic cleft after they have been used? Since the binding of the transmitters to the postsynaptic receptor is reversible, after these neurochemicals perform their role, they must be eliminated from the synaptic cleft. Neurotransmitters can then bind to specific proteins that carry them back to the axon they came from in the process called neurotransmitter reuptake. They can also be destroyed by specific enzymes like acetylcholinesterase, an enzyme that destroys acetylcholine, or they can simply diffuse out of the synaptic cleft. Fluoxetine is an antidepressant drug that presents an action mechanism related to synaptic transmission. What is that mechanism? Fluoxetine is a substance that inhibits the reuptake of serotonin, a neurotransmitter that acts mainly in the central nervous system. By inhibiting the reuptake of the neurotransmitter, the drug increases the variability in the synaptic cleft, thus improving the neurotransmission. What is the neuromuscular synapse? Neuromuscular synapse is a structure through which the neuroimpulse passes from the axon of the motor neuron to the muscle cell. The structure is also known as neuromuscular junction or motor end plate. As in the nervous synapse, the axon terminal membrane reaches the neurotransmitter acetylcholine in the cleft between the two cells. Acetylcholine binds specific receptors of the muscle membrane. Dependent sodium channels then open, and depolarization of the muscle membrane begins. This impulse then is transmitted to the sarcoplasmic reticulum that releases calcium ions into the sarcomeres of the myofibril that triggers contraction. How does the neural system get information about the external environment, the organs, and the tissues? The information about the condition of the external or internal environment, like temperature, pressure, touch, spatial position, pH, metabolite level, oxygen, carbon dioxide, etc., light, sound, etc., are collected by specific neurostructures, each type of information called the sensory receptors. Sensory receptors are distributed throughout the tissues according to their specific role. Receptor gets the information and transmit them through their own axon and through the dendrites of the neurons that connects them. The information reaches the central nervous system that interprets and uses it to control and regulate the body. What is the sensory receptor? Sensory receptor, these are structures specialized in acquiring information like temperature, mechanical pressure, pH, chemical environment, luminosity, transmitting them to the central nervous system. The sensory receptor may be specialized cell like photoreceptor in the retina, specialized interstitial structures, for example, vibration receptor in the skin. In this last case, they transmit information to dendrite of sensory neurons connected to them. There are also sensory receptors that are specialized determination neurodendrites, the olfactory receptors. According to the stimuli they collect, how are the sensory receptors classified? The sensory receptors are classified according to the stimuli they get. Mechanoreceptors are stimulated by pressure, for example, touch and sound. Chemoreceptors stimulated by chemical stimulus. Olfactory test pH, metabolite concentration, and so on. Thermoreceptors are sensitized by temperature changes. Photoreceptors are stimulated by light. Nociceptors send pain information. Proprioceptors are sensitive to spatial position of muscles and joints. They generate information for the equilibrium of the body. Thank you very much for participating in the nervous system. Please do like, share, and subscribe.